Welcome back to our channel World of Royals.
Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today's video is going to be a little different. It's going to be more of a podcast-style rant because there's something I've been noticing over the past few days that I genuinely cannot ignore anymore. And honestly, I wasn't even planning to record this video. But when you keep seeing the exact same comment appear again and again under different videos from different people who don't know each other, eventually it starts to stand out. At first you brush it off. Then you see it again somewhere else. Then again under another video. And after a while you stop and think, okay, what exactly is going on here? Because usually when hundreds of people who don't know each other are saying the same thing, it means there's some kind of shared reaction happening. So that's what today's video is about. Because there is one phrase that I keep seeing repeated in the comment sections under videos about Meghan Markle and Prince Harry's recent trip to Jordan. Over and over again. Different users, different channels, different videos, but the same exact observation. And the phrase is very simple. Something feels off. Not necessarily angry. Not always hateful. Just uncomfortable. People saying they can't quite explain it, but when they watch the footage from this trip, something about it feels strange. Like something doesn't quite land the way it's supposed to. And when you see that same reaction appearing repeatedly from people who don't know each other, it becomes interesting. Because usually when large numbers of people have the same instinctive reaction, it means there's something deeper going on underneath the surface. So today I want to unpack that a little bit. Now, as most of you probably know, over the past several days Meghan Markle and Prince Harry have been in Jordan. The trip has been presented as a humanitarian visit. The messaging around it is very focused on compassion, empathy, and humanitarian outreach. And on the surface, that's exactly what the footage shows. You see them visiting hospitals. You see them speaking with families. You see them interacting with children. You see them participating in activities like painting or working with clay. All of the visual signals that normally communicate compassion are there. But interestingly, a growing number of viewers are not reacting with admiration. Instead, they're reacting with discomfort. And again, the word that keeps appearing is that something feels off. Now, this isn't the first time people have analyzed body language or expressions in videos involving public figures. That happens all the time. Every politician, celebrity, or royal family member gets analyzed frame by frame. But what feels different this time is how widespread the reaction is. People aren't pointing to one specific moment. They're saying the entire tone of the visit feels strange. They're noticing the listening poses, the solemn facial expressions, the very intense look of concern whenever the cameras are pointed toward Meghan. And instead of reading those gestures as genuine empathy, some viewers are interpreting them as performance. Now, before anyone gets upset, let me be clear about something. This video is about perception. It's about how audiences are reacting. Because whether people support Meghan and Harry or criticize them, one thing that is undeniable is that public perception of them today is very different from what it was when Meghan first entered the royal family. And that shift in perception changes everything. But to understand why people are reacting this way now, we have to go back a few years. Because there was a time when Meghan Markle had enormous public goodwill. When she first joined the royal family around 2016, many people genuinely liked her. She was seen as modern, charismatic, and someone who might bring a fresh perspective into the royal institution. Even people who criticize her today often say that at the beginning they supported her. And for a while, most people believed the image that was presented. Why wouldn't they? Most people tend to give others the benefit of the doubt. When someone presents themselves as compassionate and socially conscious, the natural reaction is to believe them unless there is a reason not to. So during those early years, the public largely accepted the narrative. People thought they were watching someone who genuinely cared about humanitarian issues and wanted to make a positive impact. But over time, things began to change. Interviews happened. Family conflicts became public. Accusations were made. Media deals were signed. And over the course of nearly a decade, those events gradually reshaped how many people viewed this couple. And once perception changes, everything that comes afterward is interpreted through that new lens. Which is exactly why the reaction to this Jordan trip feels different now. Because people aren't just watching the visit itself. They're watching it in the context of everything that has happened over the past 10 years. And that context changes how the audience interprets every single moment. So now when people watch footage of Meghan visiting a hospital in Jordan and speaking with families about injured children, they're not just watching that moment. They're watching it in the context of everything that has happened over the past 10 years. And that context matters a lot, because many viewers believe they've seen a pattern in Meghan's behavior over time. A pattern where personal branding, financial opportunities, and public image appear to take priority. Whether it's media deals, documentary projects, or public storytelling about family disputes, critics argue that self-interest has been a consistent theme. Now, whether you agree with that interpretation or not is a completely separate discussion. But the perception itself is real. And perception shapes how people interpret new events. Because once the audience forms an opinion about someone, every new appearance gets filtered through that opinion. So when viewers now see Meghan sitting beside a hospital bed in Jordan, listening carefully and expressing sympathy for someone she has just met, some people are not seeing compassion. They're seeing performance. It's almost like watching an actor. If the audience believes the actor, the emotion feels real. But if the audience stops believing the actor, every gesture suddenly starts to look exaggerated. Every expression begins to feel rehearsed. And that's why the reaction to this Jordan trip feels different. Because many viewers are no longer watching with the same goodwill they once had. Instead, they're watching with skepticism. And skepticism changes everything. Because once people start questioning authenticity, they begin noticing small details they might have ignored before. Facial expressions, body language, timing, even the way someone reacts in certain situations. Everything starts to get analyzed more closely. And there's another element that makes the situation even more uncomfortable for some viewers. Because while Meghan is being filmed showing compassion for strangers in hospitals overseas, many viewers are remembering something happening much closer to home. They're remembering the situation with her own father. Now again, we don't know the full details of that relationship. Family dynamics can be complicated. But according to public reports, Meghan has been estranged from her father for years. And when news came out about his serious health problems, including complications involving amputation, many people noticed that she did not visit him. Now again, maybe there are reasons we don't know about. Maybe there are personal boundaries involved. But when audiences see someone expressing visible compassion for strangers while having a very public estrangement with their own parent, it creates a contradiction. And contradictions make people uncomfortable. Because for most people, compassion starts at home. When audiences evaluate whether someone is truly empathetic, they instinctively look at how that person treats the people closest to them. Family members, long-term friends, people who have known them for years. If those relationships appear strained or broken, it becomes harder for the public to believe large displays of compassion directed outward. And again, this is about perception. Whether it's fair or unfair is something people can debate endlessly. But the perception itself has taken hold. And once that perception exists, every new public moment gets interpreted through that lens. So when viewers watch Meghan interacting with patients and families in Jordan, many of them are remembering those personal family dynamics. They're remembering interviews where private conflicts were discussed publicly. They're remembering documentaries and media appearances where family relationships became part of the story. And when those memories exist in the background, the humanitarian imagery starts to feel different. Instead of reinforcing the message of compassion, it raises questions. How can someone show so much visible empathy in one situation while appearing so distant in another? And once that question enters the audience's mind, it changes how they interpret everything they're seeing. Because now every expression is being evaluated. Every reaction is being studied. Every gesture is being interpreted through the lens of skepticism. And that's when viewers start describing a feeling they can't quite explain. That strange reaction where something looks right on the surface, but still feels slightly unnatural. And interestingly, some viewers have even started describing that reaction using a very specific phrase. A phrase that actually comes from psychology and robotics. It's called the uncanny valley. And once you understand what that concept means, the reaction many people are having suddenly makes a lot more sense. Because sometimes something can look almost human, almost natural, almost genuine, but not quite. And that tiny gap between what we expect to see and what we actually see is what creates that strange, uneasy feeling people keep talking about. And that idea leads us into the next part of this conversation, because the uncanny valley might actually explain why so many viewers are reacting to these videos the way they are. So let's talk about this idea of the uncanny valley, because it's actually a really interesting concept, and it might explain why so many viewers are reacting the way they are. The uncanny valley is a term that originally comes from robotics and animation. It describes a situation where something appears almost human, very close to human but not quite. And because it's so close but still slightly off, people experience a strange sense of discomfort. Think about hyper-realistic robots or computer-generated characters in movies. If they look obviously fake, people don't mind. Your brain accepts that it's artificial. But when something looks almost perfectly human, yet the facial expressions or movements don't behave naturally, it creates a very unsettling feeling. Your brain recognizes something that should feel normal, but it doesn't. And that mismatch creates the uncanny valley effect. Now, interestingly, some viewers say they experience a similar reaction when watching Meghan interact with people during these humanitarian visits. On the surface, everything looks correct. The gestures appear compassionate. The expressions look sympathetic. The body language suggests attentiveness. But something about the emotional delivery doesn't feel natural to them. It feels rehearsed, calculated, almost like someone who has studied what compassion should look like, rather than expressing it instinctively. Now again, this is not a statement about what Meghan is actually feeling internally. None of us can look inside someone's mind. But perception is powerful, because when audiences begin interpreting someone's behavior through that uncanny valley lens, every small detail suddenly becomes noticeable. Facial expressions get analyzed. Moments get replayed. People start asking questions about reactions that normally would go completely unnoticed. For example, there are moments in the footage where musicians are playing and Meghan and Harry are sitting in a circle listening. Harry appears serious, almost reflective. But Meghan's expression during that moment has been described by some viewers as confusing. It's not quite a full smile. It's not quite solemn either. It's somewhere in between, almost like someone trying to balance two different emotional signals at the same time. And when viewers notice moments like that, they begin questioning what they're looking at. Is the reaction genuine? Is it awkwardness? Or is it someone trying to choose the appropriate emotional expression for the situation? These are the kinds of details that usually wouldn't attract attention. But once skepticism exists, everything becomes magnified. The same thing happens during interactions with children. There are clips where Meghan is participating in activities like arts and crafts with kids. And some viewers say the way she reacts feels oddly analytical. Instead of responding with spontaneous enthusiasm, asking what the children are making, encouraging them, laughing, her reactions sometimes sound like observations, almost like someone describing what they see instead of engaging naturally with it. Now, of course, people interact with children differently. Some adults are naturally more energetic. Others are more reserved. But when viewers already have doubts about someone's authenticity, those small behavioral details become amplified. Suddenly, people begin asking questions like, why does this interaction feel slightly awkward? Why do some expressions seem overly serious? Why do certain smiles appear at unusual moments? And when those questions keep appearing, viewers begin describing the overall impression with words like strange, uncomfortable, or unsettling. Now, obviously those are strong words, but they appear repeatedly in comment sections under videos discussing this trip. People say it feels like watching someone who is very aware of the camera, someone who seems to be consciously performing empathy. And when audiences feel like someone is performing rather than reacting naturally, it breaks the illusion of authenticity. Because genuine emotional reactions tend to be imperfect. They're spontaneous, sometimes messy, sometimes awkward, but they feel real. When reactions appear overly polished or carefully controlled, audiences sometimes recoil. Not because empathy is a bad thing, but because empathy that appears stylized can start to feel artificial. And once viewers begin thinking about that possibility, they often start connecting it to previous public moments as well. They remember earlier appearances, earlier controversies, earlier accusations about image management, And suddenly those memories reinforce the suspicion that what they're watching now might be another example of the same pattern. That's why repetition plays such a powerful role in shaping public perception. If something happens once, people might ignore it. But when similar criticisms appear again and again across different events, the narrative becomes harder to escape. Even if each individual situation is completely different. Because once the audience believes a pattern exists, every new event becomes part of that pattern. And that's exactly what many critics believe they are seeing right now. But there's another factor that makes this reaction even stronger. Because for many viewers, the issue isn't just about facial expressions or awkward interactions. It's about something bigger. It's about what they believe is a long-term pattern in Meghan's relationships and behavior over time. And once people begin looking at those relationships through the same lens of skepticism, their doubts about the humanitarian image become even stronger. That's where the conversation usually turns next. And this is where the conversation usually moves beyond a single trip or a single video. Because once viewers begin questioning authenticity, they often start looking at the bigger picture. They start looking at the person's history, their relationships, their public behavior over time. And for many critics of Meghan, that's where the skepticism becomes even stronger. One of the most common observations critics make is that many of Meghan's relationships appear short-lived or constantly changing. Friends seem to come and go. Alliances shift. People who once appeared very close suddenly disappear from her life. Now, of course, supporters will say this is normal. People grow apart. Life circumstances change. That happens to everyone. And that's true. But critics argue that when the same pattern appears repeatedly, it begins shaping how people interpret someone's character. For example, there have been many discussions about past friendships that once looked very strong but later seemed to fade quietly. There are stories about family relationships that broke down publicly. And there are moments where people who were previously distant suddenly reappear during documentaries or interviews when their presence helps support a particular narrative. Now again, there may be perfectly reasonable explanations for all of this. But perception matters. Because when viewers already suspect that someone carefully manages their image, moments like these reinforce that belief. The audience begins asking questions. Are these relationships genuine? Or are they strategic? Are these appearances about helping others? Or are they about shaping public perception? And once those questions begin circulating, they can be very difficult to stop. Because audiences are very good at recognizing patterns. And once they believe they've identified a pattern, every new event gets interpreted through that lens. That's why the reaction to this Jordan trip feels so different. Because viewers aren't evaluating the visit by itself. They're comparing it to everything that has happened over the past decade. They're remembering the interviews. They're remembering the documentaries. They're remembering the public disputes with family members. They're remembering the media deals with companies like Netflix and Spotify. And when all of those memories exist in the background, the humanitarian imagery begins to feel different. Instead of seeing compassion, some viewers believe they are seeing an attempt to rebuild a particular public image. An image centered around empathy and global humanitarian work. But the challenge is that the goodwill that once supported that image has largely disappeared. Back between 2016 and 2019, Meghan had enormous public goodwill. People wanted her to succeed. They were excited about her joining the royal family. They were willing to give her the benefit of the doubt. But over time, that goodwill slowly faded. And once goodwill disappears, public reactions change dramatically. When audiences trust someone, they interpret their actions generously. But when that trust fades, the exact same actions can be interpreted very differently. That's why what once might have looked like compassionate outreach now feels, to some viewers, like image management. Not because compassion itself is suspicious, but because the audience believes they've already seen enough behavior to form an opinion. And once people believe they have figured someone out, they rarely change their minds. Instead, every new appearance becomes confirmation of the story they already believe. So when viewers watch footage of Meghan visiting hospitals, speaking gently with patients, and participating in humanitarian activities, some of them are not simply seeing empathy. They feel like they're watching a performance that continues long after the audience has stopped believing the role. And that tension between the image being presented and the character the audience believes they understand is what creates that uneasy reaction. That's what produces the comment that keeps appearing again and again. Something feels off. Not because compassion itself is wrong, but because many viewers believe there is a large gap between the words being spoken and the actions they believe they've observed over time. And once that gap becomes visible, it becomes very difficult to close. Because audiences are extremely sensitive to inconsistency. When someone speaks about kindness, empathy, and compassion while their personal relationships appear fractured, it raises questions. When someone presents themselves as a humanitarian figure but critics see short-term appearances rather than long-term commitments, it raises questions. And once those questions begin circulating widely, the reaction becomes almost inevitable. People start analyzing every moment, every expression, every interaction, trying to decide whether what they're seeing is genuine or something else. And that's why the reaction to this trip feels so strong. Because many viewers believe the gap between the image being presented and the character they think they've observed has simply become too large to ignore. But of course, others will see this very differently. There are plenty of supporters who believe Meghan and Harry's humanitarian work is sincere and meaningful. And they would argue that the criticism they receive is unfair or exaggerated. But regardless of which side someone agrees with, one thing is clear. Public perception of this couple has changed dramatically over the years. The goodwill that once protected them from criticism is largely gone. And when that happens, every public gesture, even gestures meant to show compassion, becomes subject to intense scrutiny. Which brings us right back to the question that started this entire discussion. Why are so many viewers saying the same thing when they watch these videos? Why do so many people describe the same strange reaction? Why do they keep saying that something about the whole situation just doesn't feel quite right? For many of them, the answer is simple. They believe the gap between the words and the actions has become too large. And once that gap becomes visible, the performance, no matter how carefully presented, stops convincing the audience. But I'm curious what you think. Did you notice that same uneasy reaction when watching footage from the trip? Did anything feel strange or uncomfortable to you? Or do you think people are overanalyzing everything? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next video.